Welcome, Codeland attendees. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Today we have a very, very special guest, Kelsey Hightower, who has agreed to do a fireside chat with us, which is awesome because it means I get to hang out with Kelsey Hightower for the next 30 minutes. If you don't know him, he is a principal engineer at Google, also a self-described minimalist, and to all of us, he's also a leader, a speaker, a developer, and much, much more. So, Kelsey, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. I'm curious, what made you agree to do this fireside chat?
Yeah, I mean, look, any conference that's catered towards new people coming in, building their career, I can always think back to my early days in my mom's living room, doing some self-study, trying to get that IT certification to break into the game. And so any opportunity that I can to try to be that person I wish I had when I was starting, sign me up.
Absolutely. Well, we really, really appreciate it. So I want to go all the way back from your earliest memories of coding, of getting into computers. Where did it all start for you? What got you interested in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of people, I kind of started in fast food as my first set of jobs in high school. And, I looked at the whole college thing, even took a few classes and just decided it wasn't for me. But I did want, what's considered a professional career, right? I wanted to have something where I could feel good about my job, feel good about my career. And so I decided to get A plus certification, right? So that's where you learn a little bit about operating systems, a little bit about hardware. And I felt that that was going to be the right starting point for me because self-paced learning. And also I just saw a lot of the entry level jobs at the time that would just kind of listen that as a requirement. So for me, that's where I got started. And when I passed that exam, it kind of felt like that world did open up to me, right? Tech support, doing service calls. And I really felt like I was able to break into tech and my career went from there.
So when you were studying for that certification, when you kind of imagine yourself breaking into tech, what were your expectations? What did you think it was going to be like?
Honestly, when I, at the time, so this is like 1999, year 2000. And at the time, all the job descriptions were like, we want people with like 10 years of these experience with these big enterprise systems I didn't have access to. So, while open source was a thing back then, accessibility to the software and the hardware that it ran on was not. And so for me, I was kind of a little bit intimidated by the list of the job requirements. And so for me, actually, once I got all this A plus certification stuff, I decided to take my start doing contract jobs. And this is driving around the city, businesses and homes, doing DSL installs. So this is when high-speed internet first hit the market. And even from there, I was still reluctant, even with a little bit of experience, to apply for one of those jobs. So I opened a computer store. I felt it was easier to like open my own business than sit through one of those enterprise interviews because I just felt I wasn't qualified.
That is so interesting. I love this idea that starting a tech company is easier than getting a tech job. That's
It felt that way.
incredible. It felt that way. It felt that way. So, looking back at your career, given where you started, what you thought it was going to be like, and kind of how it ended up playing out, did it live up to your hopes and expectations? Did it end up being what you wanted it to be?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there was one pivotal moment when I was doing those service calls. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, year 2000. And, we pull up into these driveways and some people had these like mansions, you pull up and I remember the homeowner kind of meets me at the door and he's like, why are you here? And I guess I didn't look like the technician he was expecting to come hook up his high-speed internet. And so when I got out of the, my 86 Jeep Cherokee with my little bag of tools, I told him like, look, there's a 9-month wait list. So it's either me or you get back on the list. And so he lets me into his house. And I think he kind of admitted like I was like the first Black person to come into his house.
Wow.
And so we're walking through his house and I'm looking on the walls and he's like a city architect. Like he's designed cities. He has all these pictures with like ex-presidents. And so we walk our way to his home office. And at this point, I'm trying to make sure to make him feel comfortable. I don't want him to be nervous that they sent the wrong guy. Who is this guy? And so I remember just like really showing off like all of my skills. I turned on his computer, cleaned things off. And we have two choices back then. When you can give people like little crappy USB modem, or you can give them like the Ethernet Cat5 cable, but it requires you to put a network card in the computer. So I went the whole nine. I made sure he had the very best of the best. I even looked over and saw this big printer sitting next to his desk. So for all the young folks watching this, there's this parallel cable going from the printer to the computer. I'm like, why is this big ass printer on your desk? Like, you literally can move it. And so I remember I hooked up some networking cable so that way he can actually move it off his desk to another desk. And as he was watching me go through all of this, he asked, like, how did you learn all of this? And I was like, well, I went to the bookstore. I got a book for $35, got certified, landed this job, and got really good at it. And he was like, damn, I'm sending my son to Georgia Tech, and he doesn't know how to do anything. And I watched this person in real time change his perception of who should be in tech, who he thought I was. And I kind of felt at that moment that these IT skills were like this superpower, that the world would see me as more than maybe a young black male to be feared. It's now this person who can actually help and contribute to society in a meaningful way. So tech became my superpower at that moment.
That is so interesting. It as a superpower, it allowed you to get into doors maybe you wouldn't have gotten into, and maybe get the respect that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise. 20 years later, looking back at that moment and those expectations of it being such a powerful tool in your toolkit, did it prove to be that superpower for you? Do you feel like it leveled you up in a way that maybe would have been difficult to navigate the world without it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the glorification that we have on engineers and developers, society as a whole, had just held that whole field in high regard. So to see someone kind of thrive in that, the keynote stages, the open source projects, all the accomplishments. I will say one thing that I've learned in that 20-year period is that opportunities are typically not given, they're taken. And so that initiative to go teach yourself new skills, that initiative to go and invest in yourself. And look, there's going to always be gatekeepers, but boy, is it so easy these days, I think, to go find the tools to scale those fences.
Absolutely. So I want to touch on something that you went into, which is your education and your training. So you do not have a computer science degree. Instead, you have certifications. You're somewhat self-taught. I know you spent like a weekend learning Java, which is really incredible. Tell me about how you approach learning and how you've approached this idea of gaining experience and credentials over the years.
Yeah, so when you graduate high school and you don't go to college, you're asking yourself, what are you going to actually do? What are you going to do with your life, right? I think society poses that question to people around that age. What are you going to do with your life? And so for me, my approach to this technology game was one of survival. I was literally like, this is how I'm going to make a living. This is how I'm going to make something of myself. And so every book, every certification, every opportunity to learn new skills, I'm all over it. So I decided that I was going to double down. And my whole career, I was one of those people that if I was hired for one role, but then joined a team and found other opportunities, I was never that person that was like, oh, that's not my job. I'm like, oh, wow, I can learn some new skills, over time. And I worked in a lot of places and switched a lot of jobs in my career. I learned that every time I got a new set of skills, it opened up a whole new set of opportunities, both financially and as a career growth path. So that's been my approach. I take this stuff super serious. This is my craft. So, I treat it with all the respect that the opportunities have presented.
How do you decide what to learn next? How do you kind of create that curriculum for yourself?
One thing I think I made the mistake of early in my career, I was trying to learn everything or everything that was quote unquote hot, right? You look at the job descriptions, you will hear a little buzz in the tech news, and you're like, oh, I got to go learn that, or I'm going to get left out.
Yep.
But one thing I actually realized though was whatever job you have, right? Maybe you're writing PHP or .NET or Java. Honestly, it probably doesn't matter as much as you taking the opportunity to go as deep as you can, right? So if you're going to be writing Java, learn everything you can about the JVM, learn about the operating system that runs below it. If you take the time to click down into some of the adjacent areas for your particular technology stack, what I found was when I would switch companies, so instead of Java, now they're doing Ruby, I found like 80% of the skills were transferable, right? The things I learned in one department became applicable and another. And then I think someone described it to me as a T-shaped engineer. Right, you're gonna be in this game for a while, so take the opportunity to go deep, and I went deep around networking, automation tools, programming, and when you look back at your career, since you've gone deep in all those areas, you feel like a well-rounded engineer, and it turns out that even the stuff that we call new looks a lot like the stuff from 20 years ago. So doubling down on the fundamentals makes it so much easier to examine and adopt the new stuff when the time comes.
So you got your first certification a couple decades ago. Since then, education has changed, times have changed, and now we have free boot camps, online boot camps. We have all these, online courses. There's so many different ways to level up and get those that education. And so, if you were starting today, if you were a brand new developer trying to break into tech today, how would you navigate the different ways to learn and just the different opportunities you have to level up?
Man, I would say this, like, shout out to the tech communities out there, all of them. I mean, so supportive. I mean, they welcome in people into this, eager to teach people something new, share their experiences. Like, if I was coming in tech game today, I would find a community in tech, whether that community is related to a programming language, maybe is dedicated to front end programming if you like building websites, maybe there's like mobile backend community. Either way, I would find that community. I would go to those meetups. I would find the courage to present at that meetup, get feedback from that community, and learn how to ask questions and learn how to process the answers, because maybe all answers aren't suitable for you where you are in your career, but just joining that community, and sometimes that means going to a gold school. If you're going to go to a boot camp, remember, it's not just you that's trying to get through that boot camp. Your whole cohort, everyone around you, that's going to be the people you call when you get stuck. That's going to be the person that chooses to work at a different company than you chose. And I have this saying, different company, same team. Eventually, they're going to recommend that you come work with them at this other company. And then you're going to have the ability to do the same once you see them actually get their work done. So right now, I would submerge myself, tech Twitter, meetups, boot camps, do it all, absorb it all. And just remember, just don't worry about it. Pick a community and go all in.
One thing that is really unique about you is that you were at the forefront of technology, and you've been at the forefront for decades. Whether it's containers, when that first got popular, you were there, at the very beginning of that. And so I feel like you have a lot of perspective on where technology is today, but also a sense of where it's going to go in the future. And so if you are, starting your journey, maybe you're in your first job and you're trying to figure out, how do I build my curriculum for myself, right? If I want to be at the cutting edge of technology, how would you navigate that? One thing that stood out to me is you had a tweet, I think it was maybe a couple months ago, around kind of low-level tech and how all these boot camps and programs teach things at a much higher level, on the stack. And you said, who's teaching the low-level stuff? How are we going to prepare for that future? And so I'm wondering, when you think about coding education and kind of navigating your career today, what fields, what technologies might you encourage people to look into to build, a decades-long career like the one you have?
So I've never told this story. This is like my bag of tricks. This
Ooh.
is like David Copperfield showing you the magic trick, or at least
Okay.
my approach to it.
Yeah.
Uh, Maybe about 8 years ago, there's a guy named Simon Worley based in the UK, and he's a master strategist. If you've never seen him speak, you should go check it out. But he invented this technique called Worley map. And Worley maps are all about looking at your situation kind of with landscape in 3D. There's mountains, there's rivers, there's position, there's movement. So in business, you can think about this in a competitive way, right? Like your business is trying to outcompete another business. And so you bring all this strategy. And so we spent the weekend together. We were at some conference, and he taught me enough about mapping that I said, what if I used it for my own career? I'm essentially competing with myself. And depending on how you look at it, you're also kind of competing with other people. But don't worry, like you don't need to be number one. You need to be in like the top 10,000, right? If you get to be in the top 10,000 in anything in tech, you will be fine. There will be a job for you. And so what I do is I look at three things. Number one is, what technology is already here and is in wide
Mm.
use, right? That's our stable foundation that the world actually runs on. That's going to be things like
Mm.
SQL, right? Old school SQL databases.
Not going
The
away.
whole world is running on
Mhm.
SQL. Learn SQL is a stable technology that's going to be here for a while. It's been here for a while. And you're going to get a lot of fundamentals from it. Then there's the saying where it's easy to predict the future when you're working on it. So the things I want to see come into the world, I spend time and work on it. So I'll pick maybe one or two open source projects in areas of my own interests because I do believe in bringing passion to that particular niche, right? Because I'm making a bet, it may not pan out. Typically, I'm looking at some early open source projects, but I try to submerge myself as a contributor, someone that's giving analysis and learning in public. So people see me
Mm.
involved even when I'm just starting out. So you can get that association. And then the third thing is, what are you currently doing at
Mm.
work? Right? If you're being paid to do a particular job, I think it's just in your best interest to get really, really good at that particular
Mm.
job, go super deep. And so now you got these three bets in the
Mm.
fire, right? So now you are positioning yourselves, learning fundamentals by looking at the past, doubling down on your current skill set by focusing on the future, and then making those strategic bets by betting on the future and then help it become so.
Mm. Oh my goodness. I love how strategic and specific that was. That was so specific. It feels so actionable. I'm very happy with that answer. Thank you, Kelsey. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about kind of your personal experience in the tech industry as a Black man, as a person of color. And what I find really interesting about your position in the tech industry is I don't think, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think people see you as a Black man in tech. I think they see you as a tech leader, and you being a person of color is just kind of just a part of that story. And I know that being Black isn't something that you spend a lot of time talking about. It's not your platform, so to speak. I think I've seen you say a couple of times that just because I'm Black doesn't mean I'm a diversity expert. That's a skill set. But I do want to ask, how has being Black affected your experience over the years? Have things gotten better, easier? How's that been?
Yeah, I mean, like when I got into, I'll tell you, any game that I felt when I was growing up, being
Mm-hmm.
Black, there was this saying was you have to be 3 times as
Mm-hmm.
good to be respected at anything. You got to be
Mm-hmm.
great. You can't be average. If you're average, people will just say you don't know what you're doing, and the perception will overwhelm whatever situation you
Mm-hmm.
find yourself in. So I always felt that, look, I got to be great at this, right? If I give a talk, the talk's got to be
Mm-hmm.
great. I got to live code. I got to constantly prove myself. I have people kind of questioning, should I even be
Mm-hmm.
here? And so I do have this kind of thing in the back of my mind that I can't just walk in the room and just be another engineer. I got to be a great engineer. And so a lot of my career, whether I'm working on a team, trying to do something, you're the only Black person on the team. Sometimes you're like the first Black person who's been hired at the
Mm-hmm.
company, and you watch people around you not really know what to do with that. I remember I was working at Puppet Labs, and it was hilarious. I had just presented like a new thing that we were going to build out as a team, and had this reorg. So every engineering team got like a code name. Like the Windows team was called For the Win,
Mm-hmm.
right? Pretty
Cool.
straightforward. And then my team was called uh, Team
Mm-hmm.
LaForge, like Gordy
Mm-hmm.
LaForge. And I said, "What's that?" So I went on my computer and I typed it, and it's the only Black engineer on
Oh
Star
no.
Trek. And I'm like, "Hey, well, why'd y'all name my team that?" And they were so embarrassed. Now, here's the thing. The product we were working on was called the Forge, right? It
Okay.
was the Puppet Forge. So
Okay.
there was some
Sure.
overlap. And so just to kind of, have a bit of fun, for the longest time, my Twitter avatar was the Black Lego man that's from Star Trek, just to rub it in. I remember when the team saw me change my Twitter avatar, I was like, I think he's mad. Is he mad? Should we talk to him? And I just think people were just so uncomfortable because they didn't know how to deal with the race
Yeah.
component, by having a colleague. So I've always tried to prove myself. And also, I do know what the
Mm-hmm.
responsibility is. I do believe I do have a responsibility. I'm talking through that
Mm-hmm.
camera. There was one conference when I was like, I'm done. I'm done talking about this stuff on stage. I just want to go back to just being an engineer and writing code. I don't see the point of all of this. And as soon as I got off of that keynote stage, we're in London and we're in one of those hallway tracks. And one of the people attending, he brought his son with him. And he asked me a question, just like you asked. What is it like being like the only Black person in the room? And man, we all started like tearing up a little bit. And I realized how important it was to have representation on the world's largest stages. And he told me, he was like, I didn't know I needed a mentor until I saw you on YouTube talking about Kubernetes. And then we all look down and we see his son. He's like, I brought my son to show him not only can we attend the conferences, we can lead them. And I was like, you know what? That's what this is all about. We got to make sure that we blaze the trail for that next generation of folks coming along.
Absolutely. Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. So I want to go back to learning, and specifically learning quickly, because I think that one of the pressures that we all get, especially in that first job, the first couple months when you're onboarding, you're trying to prove yourself, you're trying to prove that you were not a mistake, as a hiring decision, and you want to prove your worth, is learning quickly, learning and getting up to speed quickly. What is your advice for that when you have to kind of, dig deep into a technology you've never seen before? You need to just, get there fast. How do you approach learning efficiently and learning quickly?
I don't know if I've ever gotten good at learning quickly, but one thing that makes it feel efficient is when I stay focused. Every day I nudge closer and closer to my goal. And I'm going to be very specific. Like usually if I'm learning a new technology, let's say I'm learning a programming language. I remember when I learned Python for the first time, I'm literally confused at all the syntax. I don't know what this stuff means. And so like everyone else, I start by copying and pasting. I find an example, I copy and paste, I hit enter, and it works. Then I try to go back and figure out what do all of these symbols mean, right? And then maybe I get stuck. Wake up the next day and I copy and paste again. And then I might muster the courage to ask someone, what does this mean? Why does this even work? Like 4IN, what is the computer doing?
Yeah.
And then I have to watch some videos, read 5 different books, 5 different blog posts. And then one day, maybe weeks later, it clicks. And then I try my own for loop. And I understand it. Now I feel like not only have I been exposed, I can control it. And that's where I get it. So to me, it was the stay consistent, stay diligent. And that way you don't feel like you just threw in the towel without really learning anything. And so that's all I try to do now at this point. Of course, given my background, it's easier to recognize where to start and maybe the fundamentals. But that staying with it until it clicks, I think that's the most important part of the equation.
Yeah, I think even today when I learn something new, I'm so impatient. Like I get so frustrated so easily and I forget that it's not supposed to make sense. The first time is just copying and pasting, like you said, seeing that it works and that getting to the point where it feels natural and comfortable just takes time. So yeah, I think sticking with it is probably the best advice in that situation. I want to talk a little bit about our responsibility as technologists. And I'm particularly interested in hearing your opinion because you have such a platform and when you talk, people listen. And one of the things that I know I've personally struggled with, and I think a lot of technologists and developers have struggled with, is what is our role today? There's so many things that, happen, terrible things that happen all over the world. Every single day, it feels like, there's something new to be upset about and to feel traumatized by. And, I think that a lot of us like the idea of sticking within code, right? We're comfortable when we're behind our keyboards and we just want to stick to building things and kind of, let the world be its own thing. And I'm wondering, as someone with a platform, with a voice, how do you handle that? How do you handle the opportunity you have to, change people's minds, to change people's opinions, to affect how they think, with really wanting to, focus on the skill that you have and the love of technology that you have? How do you kind of manage the platform with the technologist?
Yeah, so I guess, if I really think through that one, there was a time in everyone's life when you just feel like you're a nobody. You just go where the world takes you. There's no control. Things just happen to you. And then at some point in your life, you feel like you make things happen. And it could be at the smallest or biggest scales, but at some point something changes where you feel like you have a little bit of control of what happens to you, and at some point even the world around you. And the first time that happened to me, you're scared because you can no longer have this excuse that you're nobody. It's not as easy to complain anymore because you know that you can actually sway things one way or the other. And so now you have to ask that question, what am I going to do in this particular moment? And then you have to make a call. Not doing anything is no longer an option sometimes, especially when you're in the public, right? I remember someone said, hey, Kelsey, there was some incident and it was around domestic abuse. And someone asked me, and I'm not even a part of it, I'm not associated with, where do you stand on domestic abuse? And as much as I would love to say, oh my God, I'm not even involved. I mean, I've been married for 17 years. And you can ask my wife. I'm clean as they come. But what this person really wanted me to do was to say, where do you stand, so that other people understand that this is not acceptable. They wanted to hear what my public statement was on it. And I made it very clear that I don't tolerate any of that stuff, right? That stuff just doesn't make sense to me. But I understand that it happens to people and I have a lot of empathy. So there's lots of topics that I think really move me, right? I'm a minimalist because I've seen some of the documentaries of what happens when we buy too many things. They get shipped overseas or dumped into the ocean. And so now I have a bit of a personal responsibility to try to tackle a few issues, do something tangible that can make me respect me tomorrow morning, but also realize that I can't solve all the problems. Like when I saw Ukraine pop off and I'm watching the news with my family, I'm like, I don't have any more emotional bandwidth to really dig into another issue. And I think I even talked about it on social media. As much as I want to feel, I'm tapped out. And so then I have to understand, what do you do when you're tapped out? Sometimes you got to take a break. Sometimes you got to let other people kind of speak up. Sometimes you got to let other people lead. And you have to just realize that you just can't change everything, but for the things that you can and you have the bandwidth for, make sure you do a good job in those situations. And that's where I've tried to find balance.
I think another moment that a lot of us come across in our careers is picking, who to work for, right? Who to take a salary from. And I've seen, over the 10 years that I've been in tech, this has been a much more polarizing decision than I ever thought it was going to be, where I've seen, developers get dragged for the companies they work for and deciding to take an opportunity at certain places that feel a little icky, a little uncomfortable, a little compromising. And I'm going to call you out a little bit. You work at Google, which has had its controversies over the years with, the firing of Dr. Timnit Gebru, the AI researcher, to just, issues on privacy and data and, a bunch of things that have come up over the years. And so what, in your opinion, is the responsibility of the everyday coder when we're making decisions in regards to our careers, who we work for, what conferences we speak to, what podcasts we interview at, and those kinds of things? How do you think about your responsibility of taking a stand and kind of balancing your personal values with just frankly the financial incentives of making a good salary and and building your resume? How do you kind of think about that?
It's been a while. And I joined Google because there was some alignment on a lot of facets. The Go programming language, I was all over that when it came out. I was a big part of that community, getting it bootstrapped, emceeing the first conference, presenting at those keynotes, even shipped some of my own open source projects. Then the whole Kubernetes thing, right? That was huge. It was a big chapter in my life. And so there was this opportunity to go work at the place that created these two technologies. Now you got to remember, my affinity to Google starts when I'm learning. That's the search engine I use to acquire all these skills and survive. Those were the YouTube videos that I watched to acquire all of these skills. And a lot of the people who work at Google at the time, people like Rob Pike, a lot of these people I looked up to as I was navigating. I read those white papers. And so for me, there was this big kind of mountain to climb. And what people may not realize, Google was my first tech job where I got a W-2.
Interesting.
When I came from that own business, the first job I had was in a Google data center in Atlanta. So it was like my first official job breaking into tech. And so it held a very special place in kind of my heart and my career. So when I joined Google, yes, Google has its flaws. They're well known, but we have 140,000 employees. And so I've tried to surround myself around people who are there to actually see people succeed. The role I'm in cloud is about helping people succeed, the tools and things that I decide to work on. And so I kind of held that bar pretty high. And I've worked with a lot of people who've advocated for various things internally at Google. Google was actually the first time I actually did DEI work. They set the stage for that. They made me feel a bit more comfortable actually approaching the topic, flaws and all, to really kind of figure out and find my voice in that. But I think from a responsibility standpoint, I had the same question when I think about living in the United States. Like, to me, the United States, there are people from around the world, like, why do you live there? The stuff that we read about, the storied history, the political movement, it feels like at least people from my background are on constant attack. How do you still live here? And so I think for a lot of people that are in these groups, it almost feels like we can't run anywhere. It almost feels like there is no perfect company for me. There is no perfect nation for me. So at some point, just like in a civil rights situation, you realize that you can't necessarily run from all these scenarios. You're going to have to try to figure out the best impact you can make within that realm. And look, I follow people who are big critics of my current employer, like Tim O'Reilly and all of the folks that talk about surveillance capitalism. I read those books. I take that feedback and I use it as a source of empathy when I'm engaging with the rest of the community. So I'm careful not to be calling out no other company when I know that my company has work to do. So my responsibility is to be aware, take action, and then use my emotional bandwidth in the right way.
Very well put. So one thing that is very hot right now that I know you are very excited to talk about is Web3. And I really wanted to take this opportunity to talk to you about it because I know it's something that for a while you spoke a lot about. You've done a lot of Twitter spaces and tweets and a bunch of conversation on it. And I'm not going to ask you your opinion on it, but I did find it interesting that after a while, you kind of shut it down. You sent a tweet out, I think it was a couple months ago, that said, someone suggested that if I stopped talking about crypto, I would lose a ton of followers. Count me in. From this day forward, I'm done talking about crypto, Bitcoin, NFTs, and Web3. Thanks for the follow, but I got to make room for something else. So I'm curious, after, kind of being immersed in that world and being very vocal about, having what I thought were really thoughtful conversations about those topics, what made you decide to just shut it down?
I'm going to be honest. So I was drawn to the whole Web3. Look, I guess I work in Web2.
Right.
I was given that label by the Web3 community. So they increment your version number, right? This world that you've worked in, this world that you've thrived in. And I've got to remember, in my career, I brought about change multiple times in ways that made people who work in this profession uncomfortable. Things were changing and they were going to have to learn new skills. And here I was, the one that was pushing that bar. So Web3 kind of nudged me in the same way. Okay, what is this Web3 thing? Let me go take a look. And I took the technology route. What is this? Okay, blockchain. I see kind of data, ownership, et cetera, et cetera. But I looked at it from that lens. I was like, I don't know if what I'm seeing is worth bumping the version number. So, of course, I'm making comments on Twitter. And boy, did the Web3 army come for me. And what I realized, they came with laser eye profiles. It's like they were in gangs. I'm like, wow, whoa. There was like Vim versus Emacs in the tech game. But this is a whole different level. And I know why it's a different level. It's a different level because people have their money and their hope wrapped around this technology. And for decades, we've been telling people in tech, you are not your job. Tech is not your identity. This stuff doesn't replace humans. And so when I made that decision to stop talking about it, I remember having one of these debates, and I would debate anyone on the technology, but this person was so mad that I was actually making valid points. He felt like I was a threat to his investment. And he was just saying reckless things. And I remember he DM'd me and he said, hey, I just want you to join my crypto community because we can all get rich, right? That was his mindset. And And I said to him, who talks to people like this? Who says good luck being poor? Who does that? Why would I want to be involved with a group of people who believe these things? And so after talking to him, I realized that crypto for him represented hope. He was a young guy in Europe living with his parents, and he wanted some independence. He didn't see a path to a great job. He didn't have hope that he could acquire skills because for him, society had already let him down. And so for him, his best bet was literally that. Take $1, put it in a bunch of tokens, and see which one will 100x his money, and he can just be a crypto investor. So this wasn't about the blockchain. It wasn't about the technology and self-ownership. This was hope. And I realized that having these debates, I was literally treading on someone's hope. And I didn't have a replacement for that hope. And so I had to take a pause because we're beyond technology with this thing. This is trying to fill some societal gaps that I think we just got to do a better job as a society that doesn't make people feel like they got to survive by trying to gamble their money away. So
And
I took a pause.
how's that going? Has it been hard to stay away from those conversations?
No, because there's so many things in this world to talk about. Like, safe investments. I remember it was so funny. I started talking about US treasuries, like literally the safest investment you can do. And someone was like, Kelsey was on crypto for 6 months. He disappears and comes back with buy some US treasuries. So it's come full circle. Yeah. I loved it. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about crypto. I learned a lot about blockchains. But it turns out I'm a human first kind of person. When it comes to this tech game, my evolution, the path that I want to see other people on, there is so many things to talk about. And I just got back to talking about those other things, and it's be fine. And I'm happy to report my Twitter follower game is up. So the reverse actually happened.
So the last thing I want to talk to you about is how you plan your career and how you think about the future of your career. What I find so interesting about the career you've had so far is that, as you've said, you've pushed technology forward, you've been at the forefront, you've created technology, you've really done a lot in many different open source communities over the years. You've been an entrepreneur, you've done tech support, you've been a contractor, W-2, you've kind of touched on a lot of these different things. But besides the initial company you had when you were very, very young, one thing that I found very interesting is when I think about where you are today, you would be the easiest tech entrepreneur to invest in easily based on your impact, your skills, your tech leadership, your platform, all of that. But instead, you work at Google and you've been there for 7 years. And I find that just so fascinating. I feel like if you wanted to, you could easily raise millions of dollars and just kind of do your own thing. And so when you think about where your career is going to go from here, where it is today and what you see for the future, why are you still at Google? Why aren't you kind of off doing your own tech startup or, working on your own?
So a couple of things. I think one misconception I want to clear up. I would probably say most people that are like net worth $100 million or more were all employees. Make sure people hear it correctly. There's this thing called equity. And typically when you're getting equity working on global problems, right? There's a few companies in the world that actually have global style problems, right? Google's running underwater sea cables to connect continents for internet connectivity. I'm not saying Google's the only company in the world that has that, but Google presents industry-wide problems. And for where I am in my career, those are the type of problems. I want to work on problems that have 1 million people pivot and move in another direction. So there's not a lot of places in the world where I can do that. The money's been great for sure. And I reached this level of financial independence that a startup is not the most attractive thing for me to personally start. There's a point in the game where I realized I spent the last 20 years of my life getting really good at working. And my plan going forward is to spend the next part of my life learning how to live.
Interesting. Not
working, not figuring those things out. I'm an advisor to some startups. I'll always be kind of connected to the tech game, but there is an evolution of me. I remember someone wrote a Wikipedia article for me just earlier this year. And looking through that, just seeing some of those achievements. I even got a nice piece wrote up in the protocol by an author named Tom. And just to read someone tell my story through their eyes made me realize that I've done enough in this game. And what needs to happen next is that next generation, including my 15-year-old daughter, I need to try to share everything I can with them so they skill up, they get to a point where they can change the world around them just as I have in my time. So yeah, I'm going to figure out that next chapter, but it isn't optimized necessarily for building the next company. I might help do that in some capacity, but I just want to evolve as a person. So I'm going to be whatever is that, a personpreneur. I'm going to invest
That is so
in living.
So for people who, would love to have a career like yours, who'd love to, be 2 decades into the game and thinking, look at my Wikipedia page, look at my, protocol profile article. What advice do you have for them in terms of how to make some of those career decisions, how to plan out, for the long term of having a really fulfilling career like yours?
I know it's a cliche. This idea of be yourself, because most people get punished for being themselves. As much as this industry wants you to be a Linux system engineer level 2 or a DevOps engineer, at the end of the day, what makes you unique is the fact that you're a person. You're a human being. You may come from a different part of the world that people have never been. You may speak a language that the people that work with you do not speak. All that to me is a sign of opportunity. You take your experiences and you layer that on top of what we're talking about in this tech game, then you give people a reason to listen to you. We're not trying to listen to another web page. I'm not trying to have you recite what I can get on a slide deck. I want to know what your lived experience is. And whenever you can do that, whether it's on code and it's your comments inside of your code that you're writing, or that code review where you're giving someone else advice, or you're being a mentor to someone new in the game, the minute you figure out how to put your personality on top of this thing we call work is when you start to stand out as an individual and people can actually see you. I don't see the software engineer. I don't just see the QA person. I see the actual person who happens at this point in time to be doing that work, but you're so much capable of more. And whenever you decide to make that pivot, people will follow you there.
Very well put. Well, do you have any final words of advice, any final things you want to say to our community of, new developers, early career developers?
Enjoy every minute of this. I know there's going to be pressure for that promotion. I know there's going to be this comparing notes of who gets to senior engineer first. But here's the thing. If you strip away the titles, you're an engineer right now. The fact that you're in this game means a lot. Enjoy every moment. And when you get that for loop to finally work, you need to celebrate that. Do that little dance behind closed doors. Enjoy it, embrace it, because one day is going to be your turn to make someone else feel that way. And you can't do that if you don't embrace those feelings now.
Well, thank you so much, Kelsey, for spending time with us. And thank you all for tuning in to our Fireside Chat with the one and only Kelsey Hightower.